Town Garage Council meeting to order on September 27th at 7 p.m. Okay. I'd also like to acknowledge that we are on Treaty 6 territory, homeland of the Métis, as we work together towards a better future. On that note, it is also Truth and Reconciliation Week, so I'd also like to acknowledge that for this meeting. So, calling the meeting to order, I would like for us to look at the agenda and see if there are any late items that need to be added to the agenda. Mr. Hannon?
Thank you. We have 6.3, a temporary use permit application for purposes of a shelter at 719 Royal Avenue.
Okay, perfect. And I would like to make an amendment to the agenda, moving item 5.4 into section 4 as 4.2. Do we have a motion to adopt the agenda as presented? Okay, thank
I'll
you.
second.
Thank you. Any questions or discussion? Okay, call the question. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed, please say nay. Okay, looking at the minutes from September 13th, 2022.
I'll move to approve the September 13 minutes.
Okay, do we have a seconder?
I'll second.
Okay, thank you. Any comments or discussion? No? Okay, calling the question. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed, please say nay. Section 4, delegations and public hearings. We have item 4.1, recreation facility feasibility study, and I see that RC Strategies is online, so welcome, Stephen.
Good evening, can you hear me okay?
We can hear you.
Great. I have the slide deck ready to pull up unless you were looking to do that on your end, whatever works best for members of council.
I can pull it up.
Great, thank you. I can share my screen as well if that's easier for you. Okay, can you share the screen so I can see the presentation, or?
Sure.
Okay, thank you, sorry. Fantastic, thanks a lot.
That work?
Okay, well, thanks members of council for having me here. Today we're going to present an overview of the facility assessment and feasibility study for a new multi-use facility and the potential replacement of the unit. So really today is about just providing a bit of an overview of the study and certainly answering any questions that you have. Just go to the next slide, please. So a bit more detail on what we'll be presenting there tonight. So we'll just review the objectives of the work that you retained our team at RC Strategies to undertake. Very quick synopsis of the key research findings and analysis findings that we undertook that informed our work, and then we'll spend the majority of our time just looking through some of the final options and estimated costs, recommended next steps we have for you, and again, certainly answer any questions that you may have. So in terms of the objectives of the study, and I know for members of council, we've reviewed this with you before, but just thought it was worthwhile moving back to provide a bit of an overview of what was in the RFP and ultimately what you engaged our team to do. This study, this feasibility study, is really intended to provide you as council members and your administration with a resource that can inform some of your big decisions that you have to undertake as it relates to a potential replacement of the Uniplex and other recreation amenities. And this hopefully gives you a document that can inform some of those discussions and your next steps. Part of our work was also focused on looking at the existing Uniplex and confirming the condition of that facility and really validating, I think, what everybody knows, that it is at the moving towards the end of its functional and usable lifespan. And then leading out of that, you tasked us with presenting some or providing you some preliminary facility options and costs, and ultimately giving you some advice on how a new indoor facility could better provide year-round recreation opportunities to members of your community. So what informed our work? Well, certainly engagement was really quite key to that, and I believe my colleague Justin Ellis presented to you on the Parks and Open Space Master Plan a few weeks ago, and through the process we kind of tag teamed up some of the engagement. So we'll go through this in a whole lot of detail, but just to know that we did certainly try to engage the community in as many different ways as we could, hearing from both public as well as you, stakeholders, and we also had an online crowdsourcing tool and got some really good feedback through that mechanism. Next slide, please. So in terms of the Uniplex, as I mentioned, one of the elements of the project that you looked for us to do was to have some technical experts on the team come in and take a look at the current building condition, and we had members from the Architect Center team at ACI come in and do an architectural assessment of the facility, and I don't think any major surprises here, but the majority of the building components are certainly at, or if not at, certainly well past the end of their lifespan. The items that they estimate that they could actually be fixed would total about $10.7 million to do that. And then there's a number of other elements that can't even really be addressed, and they estimated that at $9 million. It's a bit of a moot point, obviously, as those are elements that can't be addressed because of the overall age and condition of the building, but they did put a cost to that. Something else worth noting there as well is that certainly you dig into any old building, much like if you were to renovate elements of your aging house, there's a good probability you find other stuff that would go wrong when you do that. So there's things that they aren't sure are issues, but they say that given the age of construction and condition of some other elements, that there's a good probability of finding some other issues if you did even attempt to do a renovation. The other, I think, important thing to look at or consider here as well is that there's likely an ice wall under the current slab of the arena. Essentially what that means is that there wouldn't be any protection between the slab and the soil, so there's sort of a permafrost or marsh-like condition that would exist under there that would impact your ability to develop on that same site for a number of years until essentially you thaw out and dry out that slab area. So that obviously has an impact on usability of the existing site. Next slide, please. Just some other key findings from the research that we undertook, and this is detailed in a lot more depth in the study document itself. But the provision of ice arenas in your region there is significantly better than a lot of other comparable communities. So given the current Uniplex and the ice arena on the First Nations community, we have about 1 sheet of ice for every 2,700 residents. That is a much higher level of provision than you'd see in a lot of communities. So there certainly isn't a deficiency in terms of indoor ice in the area. We looked at SJHL and Ice Wolves attendance. Obviously that gives us some indication in terms of capacity needs, and you can see there on the slide the SJHL's 10-year average attendance is just a little bit under 700, Ice Wolves about 450, so a little bit less than league average. In terms of SJHL arena capacities, quite a bit of variance there. On the low end about 1,200, and then on the high end about 2,600. There is, one of the things we struggled with a little bit is trying to figure out what the SJHL's expectations would be for a new arena. So in their operating guide, they identify a requirement of about between 2,000 and 2,200 seats for new franchises. But I know there's been some engagement or dialogue between the town and the SJHL over the last number of months, and there seems to be an understanding that that would only be for new franchises that come into the league, that an existing franchise could be similar to what they are currently. A few other key findings that we thought were worth noting here. Curling participation levels and trends. really everywhere are a little bit mixed and unclear at this point. There's some communities that are doing really quite well with the sport of curling, others not so much, and certainly in Orange there's been a little bit of an up and down trend in recent years. So that's something that remains a little bit of a question in terms of where curling as a sport is going. One thing we heard quite a bit through the engagement was just the bit of a deficiency or perceived deficiency in the community in terms of a large, multi-purpose, large span type of space. So a gymnasium space that can host sport, but also be used for social functions and really be sort of that kind of hub of the community for both recreation and social events. Heard through the engagement a lot about the desire for an indoor pool, but I think there's also a recognition around some of the cost impacts of that amenity, both to build and to operate. We do a lot of aquatics work across Canada, and typically a subsidy for even a small to medium-sized pool is between $500,000 and $1 million a year. That's clearly a lot of money, and there is a bit of a recognition around maybe some of the viability or limitations of that type of amenity in your community. Something else quick, just about the impacts on the existing
Lost.
negatively impact that facility. Can you hear me now?
A little better, yeah.
Okay, sorry, yeah, my internet just cut out there. Yeah, the last point I was just making is that we did hear quite a bit about the facility on the First Nations community, and just people wanting to ensure that that facility wasn't negatively impacted depending on what you do in the town. So, a potential new facility in Orange. So the way we organized a potential program is really in a core phase 1 program, which could be a number of different phases, but we, for the purposes of this study, grouped it all together. So looking at an ice arena, spaces for the Ice Wolves, so some dedicated team spaces for them. That would be a dressing room and kind of an office ticketing merchandise area, a walking running track, 4-sheet curling rink facility, which we included just to help flush out some of the cost impacts of that amenity type that was asked by you as council and throughout the process to kind of understand what the cost impacts of curling would be. So a 4-sheet curling rink, what we call a flexi hall, so sort of a gymnasium type of space, large span space that we heard a lot through the community. And then we've also identified some future expansion components, things that are more maybe a long-term wish list, indoor aquatics being one, as well as an arts and cultural facility. So those are really just blocks of spaces that we've kind of added on to the program, just to give you a sense of what site requirements you would need to accommodate those amenities. Had a lot of discussion with you as members of council and administration around arena capacities, and explored a number of different options based on different understandings of SJHL requirements and different thoughts around what an appropriate capacity would be. We would recommend something closer to what you have right now. So what you have right now, depending on how you configure the seats and how big the people are that squeeze into your bench style seating, but your current capacity should be around 1,300, and we think that that's an appropriate number moving forward, similar to what you have with Uniplex. Some other rationale behind our recommendation around that number, the Ice Wolves and SJHL attendance does not suggest that a bigger capacity is needed, but you would want to have something that would facilitate some larger events or playoff games and things like that. You have a limited market size with fairly modest growth projections, and having kind of that smaller, closer to 1,300 arena is going to be cheaper to ultimately operate compared to the 2,200 seat venue moving forward. So on the following slide here, we have some floor plan images for you. I think it's just important to put some context around these floor plan images. Really, these are just intended to show some spatial relationships and configurations, so how the different spaces can interact with each other. We've worked on a number of these projects over the years, and rarely do the floor plans actually resemble what the facility looks like when it's actually built. We're just trying to show some kind of idea of how kind of best practice would sometimes show some of these amenities could be clustered together. Important to note that we just go back to the slide there. Important to note here that this floor plan isn't based on a specific site. It's based on kind of a perfect or generic rectangular type of site. Obviously, once you land on a chosen site, that will impact what the floor plans and configurations look like. You're going to need to undertake, if you move forward with the project, you're going to need to undertake a lot more detailed design work on the project. There's a number of different levels of design that will need to occur moving forward, and that will be an opportunity for you to explore different arena bowl configurations, potentially the impacts related to that of moving the track out of the arena space. So right now we have a running track in the arena space. You may decide that that's a better fit in the flex hall space or not at all. You know, arena configurations and bowl configurations can certainly impact cost and the overall amount of space. Phasing and prioritization, construction methodologies, those are all things that you'll have an opportunity to explore moving forward. So again, these are just a little bit of how it could look. So if we just go to the next slide there. So I won't spend a whole bunch of time on this, but these are in the study document, and again, just show a bit of a potential layout based on an ideal site configuration and some opportunities to share lobby space between the curling and the arena, where the flexi hall space could fit in, which is at kind of the far right side of the image there. You know, kind of the configuration of dressing rooms, things of that nature. So again, this is a fairly typical generic bowl configuration, but does show how a facility potentially could look. So obviously you're probably curious about potential costs, and you know, this is obviously quite key to the entire project here. So the costs reflected here in the chart show the overall cost for those phase one elements. So the arena, if we just kind of break out that piece, it's about $20.4 million, and then you can see the other line items, $600,000 for those ice bowls, dedicated spaces, $5.5 for the curling rink, $2.5 for the flex hall, and then we've added some site allowances and contingencies, and FF&E is fixtures, furnishings, and equipment. So what that essentially means is that if you kind of imagine the facility, if you turn it upside down, everything that falls out would be considered FF&E, so things like tables and chairs and pylons and you know all that music equipment, things like that. We've also put some numbers just to those potential future amenities, just to give you an idea how much those could cost. So a pool, I mean, you can spend whatever you'd like on a pool really these days, but at minimum you're looking at about $20 million. The arts and culture amenity at minimum about $5 million. So. Again, these are some high-level costs to give you an order of magnitude estimate for the facility. Next slide, please. A few other considerations or things that we just wanted to highlight around the capital costs. Obviously, they're based on 2022 dollars, and anybody that follows construction, the construction market right now knows that there's a lot of volatility within construction of civic infrastructure, any infrastructure right now. We'll run into some additional challenges related to that, given your location and the cost of getting materials and labor up there. You know, that's something that you need to explore a bit moving forward as well. Number of unknowns as well that are going to significantly impact your cost moving forward. Your site, so is the site serviced or not? Are there road allowance issues or not? Things of that nature are going to impact your cost. Your project delivery methodology. There's a number of ways you can go about building a facility like this, and they all have different cost impacts. Phasing, you know, do you just do the arena as the first phase and then add on those other amenities as subsequent phases, or do you all do it at once? There's some efficiencies to building everything at once, but obviously there's a higher cost overall related to that as well. And then the other thing that will really impact your costs are the desired level of finishings. So, you know, the quality or the aesthetic appeal of the finishings will impact that as well. What we've suggested moving forward, if you decide to move forward with the project, is that you do retain a quantity surveyor as part of a future design team. That quantity surveyor will give you some good expert opinion on costs, different efficiencies or economies, things of that nature. Right now, we've essentially based the cost just on kind of unit costs that the architects have seen in the market, which translate to about $250 a square foot. There's different square foot costs associated with different spaces, and future levels of design will help you flush that out a little bit more and determine maybe where you can sharpen the pencil a little bit on your costs. In terms of estimated operating costs, what we've estimated is about $348,000 annual subsidy for the facility. That's generally similar to current, which seems a little counterintuitive, but essentially the philosophy behind that, if you will, is that you're going to have a more efficient building, so your systems are going to be better. You know, your furnace is going to run more efficient. You're going to have less heat loss, things like that. But you're also going to have a lot more space that you have to heat and manage and provide custodial services to as well. Important to note here that this estimate does not factor in a capital reserve contribution. So typically a best practice is that we would say you should set aside between 2 and 4% of the replacement value of a facility into a capital reserve, but that would obviously have a very significant impact on the overall annual operating costs. So we haven't factored that in. So other things that haven't been factored in would be things like the Ice Wolves rent or operating contributions. That's of course going to require a discussion with the Ice Wolves as a major tenant of the facility. We often get kind of a question around the operating efficiencies between a smaller and larger arena capacity. Really the biggest efficiency is with the vent hosting. It's not even so much with utilities, because the larger versus smaller capacity, the extra space is relatively negligible, but the more seats you have, the more seats you have to clean and provide security to and kind of crowd manage and all of that. So it really is around event hosting. A couple more slides here. Site considerations. So obviously we wanted to give you a bit of analysis around your current site and what that might mean moving forward. So the architects think that the footprint of the existing site would be big enough to accommodate the full build out of the facility, certainly the phase 1 components, but it's going to consume the majority of the footprint on that site, likely over 80%, which is going to be limiting in a whole bunch of different ways, parking being the obvious one, but also just kind of flow space or the functionality, some of the design considerations. In terms of optimal footprints for the phase 1 component, so again, that's the arena, the gymnasium, and the curling rink, you would need about 12 acre site. If you wanted to accommodate something that would be the full build out, all of those blocks, would it be the phase 1 plus the pool and the arts and cultural center, you would need about a 14 acre site. Let's go to the last slide there, please. So next steps. A number of things you would suggest you need to do if you decide to move forward with the project. Obviously, there's a number of programmatic aspects of the project that you need to probably further discuss and confirm before you really move forward with anything else. Seating capacity being one, the amenities, potential phasing. So again, you know, if you want to just do the arena or those other pieces that we've identified, and then some of the operational options and approaches that you could undertake in terms of how and who operates the facility. Secondly, I think a big amenity question for this facility is curling, and there's some further, I think, monitoring and analysis of curling participation levels and trends, and some discussions with the club that would need to occur before rationalizing a $5.5 million curling facility. Thirdly, engage with the Ice Wolves to determine the partnership options and frankly their contribution levels to a potential facility, both for their spaces and in general. If those three things happen, then we suggest you move forward to developing a funding model and fundraising strategy. And then lastly, engage with the appropriate expertise around detailed design, further refinement of the costing, site, some of the site technical work, geotech, and so on. So with that, thanks for listen to the presentation there, and then happy to answer any questions you may have.
Councillor Vetri?
So the cost of this build, this is the build that we can actually add on to, right? When you guys talked to us earlier, you said there was a cheaper option, but those are the ones that you can't add on to, right?
Yeah, thanks, Councilor, for the question. Yeah, that's right. So this would reflect an estimate, again, a very high level estimate around traditional construction. There are a number of ways you could save money for sure, and one of them, as you alluded to, would be a pre-engineered type of structure. And it's not that you can't add on to a pre-eng building, and there's just a number of challenges to doing so. Like you're kind of buying a kit, essentially.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
So if you were to, let's say, we determined that $5.5 million for curling rink wasn't probably a good investment, how would that change the configuration of how would you take that space and how would you move it?
Yeah, another good question. I think there'd be a number of possibilities, and you would really need to land on what the specific site is to really better understand how that would impact configuration. Like right now, the concept shows some opportunities for shared spaces between like lobby and dressing room and concessions and things like that. I think it would all come down to the site and then what some of the other amenities you decide to move forward with, how you phase it in. Like there's kind of a whole number of variables there.
So the arts and craft culture area is it fairly close to the size of the curling area? By the drawing, or?
Yeah, that's how they size it out. I mean, it's a bit of a nebulous space at this point. Is it studio spaces? Is it a theater plus studio? It's just, that was really what we wanted to do, is just to put some blocks on there that would show what the full build out of facilities would be, so that you pick a site that could accommodate the full build out. But I mean, those are probably off into the future amenities, so maybe over the next 10 years another need or a trend emerges and that block of space becomes something else.
And one last question, if you took out the track, would that be commercial available rental space? Is that what you have on the top, as opposed to having the track?
It could be, like the tracks are kind of interesting because, like, relative to the overall cost of an arena, they're a fairly low cost addition. So, I wouldn't say we necessarily identified a track as a core need just because you already have one at the facility on the First Nations community as well. But it's something that a lot of communities kind of add in because it is fairly low cost in theory. Now, that said, it does require you to have a second level, which adds cost to the facility. So if you took out the track and did that in the Flexi Hall, that would change the bowl configurations and maybe provide some efficiencies there. So there's kind of a number of variables that you kind of move around and consider as you move forward with design.
I have a few questions.
Councillor Clausen, yeah.
So you're projecting $10.7 million in repairs plus another $9 million to the current facility to get it up to snuff, if you will. Does that seem a little bit ridiculous? Like, what are you changing or renovating for $19 million?
There's just a number of elements that would fail, that they fail building codes, and I'm not the architect, so I'd have to defer you to the technical report and the appendices. But I think it's also important to note that $9 million is just an estimate for things you couldn't do, even if you wanted to as well. So there's about 10 million and change that you could do to bring the building up to snuff, and this would just be to extend its service life into the medium term or potentially even the short term. Like, there's a number of things that are just frankly safety issues in that building that are noted in that report. And as I also alluded to, once you start digging into some of those things, there's a really good probability that you find other issues that you may or may not be able to address.
Yeah, no, I understand that, and I'm fairly familiar with the facility and with these types of repairs, and $10.7 million is a pretty ridiculous number. Was there any considerations, and Councillor Gradisky asked some of this, but for retail, office, rental, or those types of spaces, to be available to offset some of the operating costs that we're projecting a $350,000 deficit, if you will, each year. We could potentially offset some of those costs with some commercial rental spaces for restaurant or that type of thing. Was there much consideration put into that?
Yes, and I kind of two parts to that. Like, so the lobby space is big enough to accommodate that. Like, so it's just a block of space right now, but like you could look at those spaces. In terms of the operating budget, we accounted for that as net zero, just based on our experience that communities aren't experiencing a whole lot of revenue potential with these spaces. Obviously, it's a little bit context by context or community by community, but around food services, that's been a very risky proposition for a lot of communities. Typically, communities that have a facility kind of hubbed up with a high school have a little bit better potential, but it's not something that we've seen be a major moneymaker in a lot of facilities other than some in very large markets.
Okay. Under recommended next steps, I think there's another important one that has to be added into is engaging with surrounding communities with Orange Band and Northern Administrative District, because the people from the entire area are going to use this facility, so I think that would be a very important step as well.
Yeah, I'd agree, and maybe we didn't specify that, but it's wrapped up in the funding model next step there. That I think those funding model conversations would, I'm sure would include some of those dialogues.
That's it for me for now.
Matt, I didn't
Thank you.
I didn't catch quite the full second part of your question. Were you asking about like tenants on the outside, like what would fit underneath like the stand?
Office space, is that what?
It could be office space or a retail space or
Like I'm
available
thinking like
for
the
a
Legends
restaurant
Center?
operator that could be rented out as commercial space of any sort, really, because that could offset a good portion of those operating costs.
Well, and that was something I was going to mention too. Is I know that like if you go to like the Legends Center in Warman, they've got, I think it's like a Subway, a GNC, some retail spots on the outside. But the other thing I was thinking of as well is if this is kind of a fitness center, is there room in the current build that would be able to have, let's say, like a Good Life Fitness, Motion Fitness, like a larger chain style gym that could take that space underneath? And I mean, that would obviously subsidize heavily into what the Icewolves would have to have in their weight rooms and fitness centers, because they could have that attached already, as well as provide an additional service to our community. And that tenant space would probably subsidize a little bit of our annual cost as well. I'm thinking of like a single tenant rather than trying to manage multiple in our building. If you can get one and it served the purpose of what we're trying to accomplish with the arena as well. Was that ever explored?
Yeah, that was something we looked at, and again, I would question whether you'd have the critical mass for a fitness center to be long term a major profit center that would offset operations. Like, it would be a valuable amenity offering in the community, but in terms of it helping subsidize operations, I wouldn't say I would suggest there's a whole lot of opportunity for that, but something to maybe further explore, as you move along into kind of business case development if you move forward.
Thanks.
So, Stephen, I have a question, and you may have mentioned it. What is salvageable dollar value wise? What can be salvaged from the rink in a new facility? If you were to give that a dollar mark.
Yeah, I don't have an answer. Like, that wasn't included in the scope of the architect's assessment.
Okay.
Yeah, you would need to. I mean, I guess you'd have to better understand the timeline for building the new facility as well, and that would probably factor into that quite significantly.
Okay, thank you. Are there any more questions from the floor? Okay, thank you very much for sharing the information you've shared.
Thanks, Stephen.
Great, thanks everyone. Have a good evening.
So at this point in time, I'd like to pass over the chair to acting deputy mayor, or not sure what Joe is right now, but to Councillor Hrdisky. As I am part of a delegation that is
Immediate
presenting.
past.
Huh?
Immediate past.
Okay, yes. All right, perfect.
Okay, so we have a delegation for council and acting mayor is a participant in that, and she will do the presentation.
Okay, so we did supply a PowerPoint. I'm just going to ask Allison to pull it up. So good evening, honorable council members and Town of Garage staff. My name is Viviana Rees, and I come to you this evening as a community member of the Town of Garage.
Good evening, thank you for having me. My name is Megan Bevan, and I'm also here as a community member, not as the superintendent of Harmony Light School Division responsible for Churchill. I'm here for community purposes.
So one of our main reasons for being here with you this evening, as you're going to see in the PowerPoint here, is the treat area adjacent to Churchill High School, at the back of Melheglin Uniplex, at the back of the LaRange Cooperative Daycare, and at the back of homes on East Crescent, where
That's where I live, is right adjacent to Churchill Community High School, the laneway leading to the back of the forested area and beginning of the path to the rink.
of note is the fact that there's also a daycare within Churchill High School that services community members as well. So our main concern, I guess to our shock, awe, surprise, is not just a concern that's new or ours. Just speaking to community members around the community, it's something that's been an area of concern for the past 25 years with inconsistent upkeep and attention. If we could go to the next 5 or so slides, what you're going to see in the next 5 or so slides are areas, or I guess camping areas within that bush area, where different individuals, different times of day, different times of the year, at night also, have been engaging in, I guess for the most part, illicit, illegal practices ranging from drug use to alcohol use, to living there. I myself have observed individuals using alcohol and drugs in the area. I know that last council meeting we had, there was a fire call to the area, and there's also been reports of indecent exposure and indecent acts within that area. May I remind you, adjacent to a school that holds a daycare, homes, and well, the arena, which is used by a variety of community members. You can see there, right, what's, I guess, a homemade bong, right? That people used to smoke illicit drugs in, right? Again, adjacent to a school, adjacent to homes, adjacent to an arena, adjacent to a daycare. Is this the kind of community we want? I sure don't, and that's why we're here tonight. You could go to the next couple of slides. Another camping area. So the next couple of slides do show some graffiti that exists on the back side of the Melheglin Uniplex. You know, we could point fingers and say it was so-and-so, it was so-and-so, but at the end of the day, it's there. I know that in conversations, people have suggested that, well, you know, if people can't use this area, they'll move to another wooded area, and they very much may. But this right now is town property, and it's a concern. It's a community safety concern. It's a community safety concern in all wooded areas in the community. But this one primarily because of the fact that, again, I could repeat it, but you all know where it's located.
I've lived on East Crescent since 2007, and definitely there's been an increase in usage of the forested area. This past summer, I was sitting at my table at lunch in June, and I had my neighbor charge through my house looking for my hose to put out a fire just behind my fence. July, my husband and I, at about, it was around 8 p.m., saw smoke coming out from the treed area as well, and went back to investigate, and some young adults ran away from us at that time, and we stomped out the fire that they had just started. I know a few years ago, I there were trees cut down, and as you can see from the pictures, they were left, and that's now what is being used to fuel the fires that are being started. Even last night, walking home from the hockey rink, because hockey has started, I would prefer not to drive, but it's coming to that, because when we walk home, you can hear the activity in the bush, and there are multiple points of entry for these campsites, and when we walked around in there during the day, there's at least 5 that we've identified. There's garbage strewn about, the makeshift bongs, empty bottles of alcohol, there are blankets and discarded clothing. It's really a sad state of affairs back there, and even this past winter it was around supper time, there were people hanging out back there and came out and stole right from my front yard from my kids their sleds. So concerned about that as well too, that it's not even safe for my kids to play out in the yard.
As recent as 2 weeks ago, we had a youth from the community overdose in the bushes. As recent as today, there were youth drinking in the bushes, right? So it's becoming an area for high illicit activity. And we're here to ask you to humbly take into consideration the following request. If you go to the final slide, we just want someone to thin out the trees. And that's what we would like you to consider this evening, based on the fact that there's a number of things happening back there, and it's increasing, it's not decreasing. And I know we could say, again, they're going to move somewhere else. Well, maybe they move somewhere else, but it's not adjacent to a school, a daycare, a recreational facility, or homes. We could also say, well, it's going to get cold right away, the activity will stop. We don't actually know that. We don't know those things. So I guess our request is, please, help us in some way, because it is a community-wide concern, because nobody wants this happening.
And as a resident, I can say that it doesn't go away with the cold weather. People still are using the area back there as a recreational site to hang out and partake in illicit activities. And I would really love to see the area cleaned up as a resident. I know it's been done other places around the town and in our neighboring village, and it does serve to actually make the area more aesthetically pleasing as well, and safer for our community members.
Okay, that's all we have to say. Are there any questions?
I'll just make a general comment. I think your concerns are definitely being heard, and I think we definitely have to do something with that area. We'll determine what we do, but certainly thinning isn't a bad option, and general cleanup, but it looks like certainly would be required as well. So possibly some. I still think because the path is kind of a shortcut to the arena, maybe some lighting would help to kind of make it safer for the kids as they're going through, because I know a lot of them walk through that area to get to the rink.
A large number of kids that walk through daily for figure skating and hockey.
Yeah.
Can we ask administration to put together some costs on what we'd be looking at to do something like that if we were prepared to tackle it?
Yeah, we could do some investigation. I'm not sure. First, we'd have to scope out what the expectation is from council, because we're talking about probably about 60,000 square feet of area that's thinning is going to be a massive undertaking for bulldozing or accommodating too. There aren't formal municipal trails there, and if we are opening it up and or formalizing them, then there would be a cost associated with trail development, because right now it is just a forest and people are traversing through there on more paths, but they aren't what I would call safe paths or paths that we would want to take on liability for formalizing. So there's a number of issues that this will involve, and I just need to hear from council what the expectation to redevelop that area would be before it costed out.
I'm not looking at formalizing any trails in there. There's existing trails that have been there since I was a little kid walking through there from high school to go wherever, but something maybe similar along the lines of the Fire Smart program where it's there only for the intersection, so at least there's some line of sight through.
But I'll speak with the fire chief who'd be more familiar with that kind of work. He might have a ballpark sense. There is a few challenges with that. I mean, I know that the departments have gone in there and cleaned up, and then immediately again it's a disaster. But one of the other challenges there is there's elevation issues. So if we thin it out, you still might not see in from the parking lots or the other areas around. So we'll have to come up with a strategic plan to kind of make sure that if we do want to tackle this, that it's effective.
Councilor Frederick?
Has RCMP been contacted on this
Multiple
information?
times.
And what has their answer been to it?
Patrols, I know that they responded to a rink incident last Thursday where a staff member had to barricade themselves in due to people that were hanging out in the bush that went into the rink to steal food and beverages. RCMP were called, picked up a few people, but because they were underage, they were handed over to a parent because there was a parent available, right? I know that you know of other incidences over the years, right? Like there's,
As recently as yesterday, we toured the RCMP through the bushes so they could see the areas of concern where.
Did they say they would add extra patrol though, like do an extra run through there at all for you guys?
it was requested, they agreed, but we all know how short-staffed they are too, right?
Oh yeah. I'm just wondering because, you know, and I'll just be honest here, we can cut down trees, but unless we have an enforcement to go in. You know what I mean.
I know
I'm
what
not
you
against cutting up the
Yeah.
trees and that, but we're gonna need some enforcement as well to keep it clear.
And there has been, like, I know that staff from the adjacent facilities do on a semi-regular basis do a walkthrough, just to make sure things aren't happening, so
Yeah.
that I can assure you of personally, actually, so.
And when we walked through yesterday with the RCMP, the request was made, you know, if even weekly, if they have the capabilities to do so, but just like any sector, they're also short.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they have a four-wheeler and that, and they could cruise there, then, yeah.
I did want to say, before any comments, thank you for coming to an official channel to bring it to council. It is refreshing that we see it through either Service Tracker or a delegation to council rather than the Tri-Community Talk. I know that everyone thinks that's how activism works. This is way more effective, I will say, because it gives us the resources of our administrative team to be able to look at it. I know that we don't pay them hourly to scroll Facebook and find that, so thank you for showing up to the meeting itself. I just brought up the municipal zoning maps, and I'm partially confused as to what jurisdiction this would fall under, because AB is something that would be the footprint of our Uniplex, if I'm not mistaken. I'm sorry, I'm the only one looking at the map. I figured once I brought it up, everyone would know what I'm talking about. But if you bring up the zoning maps, you can see that there's two lots that basically, four lots that kind of circle around East Crescent. And maybe if we just wait a second, this can be brought up so we can all see the same thing.
May want to use the zoning maps in the filing folder on the desktop because it includes a whole set.
This one does too. This is what I found. It was a website.
Okay.
I was just able to zoom in, like,
Mm-hmm.
so yeah, I used that top map, but
You can get a little closer with,
that one. So you can see that from the maps there, we've got C, A, B, Z, and X. That kind of incorporates the entirety of East Crescent, if you will. So I know that the trail, because I used to walk it every day, was between basically AB through C and coming up the back side of East Crescent, or the north side of East Crescent, was the old trail. I don't know what it's been like since the renovations. So, I mean, to me, if we have C and AB being the treed areas, part of this would fall under what we would own as our property, and the other part would already be owned by the Northern Lights School Division, and that would be their yard maintenance that they would have to be looking at separate and apart from us. Anyway, we can't go into any property and just start tearing down trees, right?
Yeah, so if you look at the fence line, there is a fence line that differentiates between the school and the bush area, right? Like we're aware of where that fence line is, and the location we're talking about is on that other side of the fence line.
But just because there's the fence line, is that the survey lines as well? Like, did they put
Yeah,
the
well,
fence
that's
up on
what
the
it's
survey?
based on, right, when the new building was created. Cause otherwise, I think people in one of those facilities would have just grabbed a chainsaw and gone to town, right?
Okay. And then the other part of this is I know that as we've had lots developed, I know behind my place of work there used to be what we called the sharing circle, and it would be a daily hangout for people. Much of the same activities would be happening, and recently we've had a developer take some trees down from the area and it just moved further down. And I think if council is looking at an overarching policy on what we're going to do to combat this, we shouldn't just take lot A, B, but where is cleaning up those areas going to move it to? And moreover, what can we do to just stop the behavior and look at that upstream take of what we can do to get this nipped in the bud, if you will, because I think we can invest hundreds of thousands of dollars cleaning that up, and then parcel F will be the next, and then after parcel F is all cleaned up, then parcel C will be the next. Like we'll continually be moving this all over the place. I know that for our delegation, it's in their backyard, and I understand completely that we need to look at that area to help our residents in that area, but we also serve the entirety of the community, and we have to take that approach of what do we do when it moves to the next spot and the next spot and the next spot. And I want us to be cognizant of that as we make our decisions. And I don't think we're going to get there tonight, but I don't know what next steps would be, and I'm kind of looking towards the administrative planning and administrative channels that we can look at. If there's some ideas that you might have that we can be brought forward, or if any other council members have any ideas. I don't want to just put a motion forward saying, yes, clear the trees for a budget of $300,000. I don't think that's a logical explanation, or a logical.
Well, our intent, if the direction is so, would be to cost out this site, because that would be the direction given, in terms of doing some thinning and other work. In terms of identifying where this might go and how much of that is our land and how much of it is private land, we could look at that. I think there is obviously wooded areas even within view from the school on other sides. So we could talk about it. The bigger issue of how do we curb the activity in terms of working together, bring the RCMP in as a delegation and set priorities as council. That would be one way to go about it. In some places where that activity is more prominent in the summertime, they might look at a seasonal bylaw officer position, like a junior member, who would just be chasing them out and making sure that activity isn't happening. But I don't know if that addresses the social issue of drug use or alcohol use in the community.
Yeah, so no, this isn't meant to sound callous or anything, but what do you see as the root of the issue, and what solutions are you bringing forward? Thinning the trees is a pretty blanket kind of, non-specific request. So what's the root of the issue? Because to me, what I'm hearing is it's human based. It's not the trees. The trees aren't the problem. So if we're looking at solutions, is there a solution that is reasonably feasible? Is there a quick win to achieve with this that would work towards satisfying, improving the safety of the area, improving the unattractiveness of the area, Anecdotally, I've heard from people that 3 generations ago were using that space to smoke cigarettes and hang out, you know, like, youth have been doing that for a long time. And, you know, is there an effort in the school to educate students about, you know, using that area, or talk about what's happening there and why, if it's youth or students that are actually using that site unsafely and after hours, what's the upstream approach when it comes to a social services standpoint. It sounds as though from the descriptions that some of the users of the site are addicted and hard to house folks. So when it comes, like when it boils down, it's hard for me to embrace this as a municipal issue because the trees aren't at fault. So I would like the discussion to maybe bend a little bit towards the bigger discussions we've already been having about what we can do with our provincial partners, what we can do with our service providers, what we can do with some different things, because there's no way we can patrol all of our wooded areas that might have paths through them. That would be unfair to ask the RCMP to constantly patrol that, and if there's higher frequency used areas in certain points, yes, I understand we should try to have a little more surveillance on those sites, and definitely if it comes to fires and the unsafe behaviors, triggering that and making sure that the calls are made so that I know the RCMP, when they get a call, it tracks the more frequent a call or type of call to a specific area. I've been told to make the call, regardless of whatever. It's annoying as a resident, it's annoying as a business owner, it's annoying as whatever, but it does work towards helping the RCMP do their jobs better and help us have a safer community. So I think I'll just kind of like throw it back with, it might end up just being a rhetorical question at the moment, but you know, what's the solution? And
So I guess as a community member, which is the way I am presenting myself this evening, drugs and alcohol are a serious issue in this community. We have a gang problem, and we have an illicit drug trade that's happening in front of our noses. Last night, in front of my home, there was a police chase. Where did they go? To the drug house down the street. The drug house that everybody knows exists but can't really do anything about because it's always in the gray area, right? We have alcohol problems in the community. We live in a place that we all love, and that's why we're here. But unfortunately, some pockets may have normalized the use of drugs and alcohol as part of what's considered normal life. But you know what? It's not. It's not normal to get high every day. It's not normal to drink every day. What can I do as a community member? I can educate people. I can share, you know, drugs are going to, you know, kill brain cells. Alcohol is going to cause cancer. These are the root of other social issues, right? But how do we begin to address that as a community? And that has been a conversation that I have noticed that council has had in the past. And yes, we've talked about more policing, we've talked about more awareness, we've talked about more community programming. But where are we? We're at a standstill, right? And yes, you are right. It may be youth that are using that area at times, but it's not just youth. I have seen people sleeping there overnight, getting up in the morning, and they don't attend that school. I have seen other youth that I don't recognize. I don't know if they attend another school. I don't know if they go to school, or maybe they just look really young. I don't actually know. So it is a huge problem, unfortunately. And yes, we need all our partners to be part of it, but again, short-staffed, right? So how do we attract all those people, those professionals, those specialists with those clinical skills to support people that need support? How do we attract them to the community? So I guess that's my rhetorical question. Do you want to add anything?
One of my concerns with that area, and you know the trees are not at fault, but the underbrush and some of the smaller trees do provide coverage. They provide that concealed space for drinking, for engaging in use of drugs and whatever else is going on back in that area. Is it predominantly youth during the day? Absolutely. Is it after school and in the evenings too? Yes, but as Viviana mentioned, there's also adults that are using that space, and like I said, as a resident, I have seen it escalate over the past years. And in terms of engaging community partners, putting my superintendent hat on now, we have brought in mental health capacity building into Churchill Community High School this year, so that's in partnership with SHA. We have other partnerships where we have success coaches, so we are doing our part on the school side of things to support the students and bring more awareness to them as well to lead healthier lifestyles.
Okay, one last comment and then we'll wrap it up.
Yeah, I just like what I'd like to see going forward is deputy or the fire chief to look at what it would cost to within that area needed, and yeah, to moving forward, look at ways we can kind of curb this. I realize as a youth, I was drinking up at the quarry in the bush there, so I get it, I understand it, right? But we do have a lot of different issues nowadays, and there is great supports within the community, like mentorship programs, stuff that the library is putting on for you. So there is stuff, and people are doing stuff in the community, but we can just step up and do maybe just a little bit more.
Okay, so yeah, I think what we'll do is we'll turn it over to administration. They can come up with a pro and con approach to this thing. Look at the cost, and I agree that thinning thing, like the more visibility you have, the less chance you're going to have things occurring. And so we have to look at that, and we have to look at the cost. And so we'll just have a report from our administration, and we'll discuss it further. So thanks very much for coming.
One more quick question, Megan. Have you and your neighbors had a conversation or any interest in doing some of that yourselves with the assistance maybe of the town? Of doing something?
We haven't, we just more have a community group chat on Facebook Messenger, kind of letting each other know when cameras go off in the evenings, but I know for myself, like my husband and I personally, time is pretty precious with 3 hockey teams and our jobs, so.
Yeah, it's not your property either, so.
Okay, thanks very much. And, like I said, we'll move that on to administration. Report on that. Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you for listening and for your time.
Just as a comment to administration following that conversation, like from my perspective, if you're looking for direction in a more specific sense, doing just a general cleanup, I think it is town property, like knowing what the staff resources might require, getting the fire department on board to make sure that there's any sharps or anything that need to be picked up, they're being picked up safely and things like that. But I think just generally a general clean that we would do in, say, the lot behind the clinic that the municipality owns and where that's a camping area and that gets unsafe. I know that that's been cleaned up once before at some point, maybe more than that, but because I know residents actually go in there personally and clean up areas like that. So just in terms of, what's our bottom floor entry level is what I'd be as an immediate action is what I'm comfortable with if you're doing costing.
Just so we're on the same page, my intent would be to bring a report back to council next meeting, give you a variety of options with some pro cons.
Yeah.
Some of them will be thinning, some of them might be other things that we can brainstorm. We can look at doing a little bit more of an intensive cleanup. I know that staff do clean that regularly, and then it becomes, and we saw it even with the downtown cleanup we did, we could do a comprehensive clean, and the next week it could be full garbage again, right?
Mhm.
So it is just one of those ongoing challenges, but we can, that doesn't mean we give up on it. We need to stay on it and do what we can. So we'll come back with a report, and council can debate the pros and cons of different options and costing too, because if it's a substantial cost, maybe then the investment is in patrol and other solutions too.
I'm just wondering, because hearing from this is the second time this issue's come to council, but there seems to be a need for time is of the essence, and if there's actions that administration can undertake without council approval that do at least, take a step towards addressing or making residents feel like this issue is being addressed, then
Personally, I
Yeah.
walked through the area today and
Yeah.
ran into some people from the school, and there was easily 20 youth in various parts of that. It is going to get until there's a more substantive solution. It's going to continue to get used, continue to get dirtied. It's going to be an ongoing maintenance concern. Given the size of the scope, and by the time we bring this back to council and it gets approved, I'm questioning whether we'll be able to achieve anything before the snow flies, to be honest. Plus budget, that would be another consideration. So, but if we have at least a direction that we can plan for in the spring, either way.
That's what I'm thinking.
And maybe some interim cleanup and do the best we can in the interim, but we'll come back with some ideas and comments.
Thank you.
And I guess it's been pointed out, it is a sensitive area, we got the daycare and stuff and all of that. But, it's not like some other areas that they might move to that are quite.
It's like a park, like with the school there, the rec center, I would consider it much like if this activity was happening in and around Patterson Park, which sometimes it does, then it becomes concerning. More concerning than if it was happening somewhere else where it wasn't highly visible. The flip side of that is when it happens when it's not highly visible, the response time of a bad situation can be worse.
Yeah.
So that's the trade-off there. But
Once I cool down. Okay,
I'll give the chair back to you.
right, thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, Councillor Berdisky. I'm really not sure anymore at this point. Okay, so, resuming the chair, I would like for us to, look at moving into committee of the whole. Do we have a motion?
also move.
Okay, do we have a seconder
I'll
for,
second.
okay, all in favor say aye, anyone
Aye.
opposed please say nay. Okay, so as we move into committee of the whole, item 5.2 is for information only, Q3 strategic priorities update, accompanied by the strategic priorities chart for Q3. Are there any comments, questions around that item? No?
I'll move to receive and file.
Alrighty, okay,
I'll second.
alright, all in favor?
On the motion, I do know that we've got, in our strategic priorities chart, we have the council advocacy and partnership priorities that has been on there for 3 consecutive charts. I know that through council advocacy, it's easy for each one of us to take that and internalize it, but at a certain point, I think we need to have a conversation amongst council on, putting our best foot forward and all saying the same thing and having key areas of where we can start to advocate for those types of things, whether it be through nonprofit or government or petitions or whatever we have to get. I think there is if we're going to be moving forward in a unified manner, I think we need to have a good, strong way of bringing that advocacy forward. And I don't know if we use our administrative team to just facilitate that discussion, or if we want to have a conversation about putting it into the budget for next year, to have that communications plan on the high level at least created so that we know what we can share consistently. Just a thought. I know it's for information purposes, I don't need a motion, but maybe if we can flag that for future consideration.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor McPhail. So, that motion is carried.
And Kale,
Oh, right, no motions are required, okay. Any other questions or items for discussion around item 5.2? No? Okay, moving on to item 5.3, quarter 3 variance report. For information only, there is a financial report that has been presented and a budget estimate. Any questions or discussion around that?
Would council like an overview, or is the report self-explanatory, or we can take questions, however you prefer?
I think it's pretty self-explanatory.
Yeah, everything's outlined
Looks good.
and itemized appropriately. Okay.
I mean, generally speaking, just commentary about both wrapping into the priorities and the budget is that performance seems to be very, very strong. Sure, some of this is things that aren't necessarily from good management. Some of them are happy accidents, and some of them are good management. But we'll take the overall results any week, and we're happy to be moving priorities along and staying within our financial plan.
No, it's definitely good to get a report after the third quarter, just kind of know where we're at to finish off the year. So it's looking promising. So.
With that being said, like there's a lot of capital projects that due to supply issues, due to just timeframes that are gonna have to be carried over to next year, so there's a bit of a expectation that we will have to foot some of those projects later on. But I mean, other than that, like we've been sending out, I've been sending out reports to all the management team on a monthly basis, and they've been doing a very good job at sticking within their budgets. So really, I mean, this is just showing how good good job everyone's been doing.
In the report, I do have one question on the line item under the fire department fees, 321.50-1. Is it just the fact that we don't have 2 quarterly payments in there, that we don't see the full budget and actual marrying up?
That's correct, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we only have 2, yeah, of course.
Okay, just want to make sure.
Thank you.
I'll move to rise and report.
Okay, do we have a seconder for that?
I'll second.
Don't need a seconder? Okay. Moving on to item 6 regarding business. Item 6.1, zoning bylaw amendment. Way North Towing Limited. There's a request for a decision around the zoning bylaw amendment. Any questions or discussion? Or is there a motion that is that someone has to put on the table?
I'll move that council direct administration to prepare a bylaw that will amend zoning bylaw 57216 to include tow truck dispatch and towing yard.
Okay, do we have a seconder for that motion?
Just for clarity, your worship, would be as a permitted use or a discretionary use?
As a permitted use.
Permitted use, thank you.
Okay,
I'll second that.
okay. Do you need that motion? Do you have it? Yeah. Okay, any discussion?
One question I have in regards to zoning applications that would, or zoning bylaws, whether it be residential or in our commercial district, if you will. If there is, what I want to say is like kind of that common sense approach of, you know, this kind of fits our area, although it's not specifically stated that it's a permitted use, is there an option to create a temporary license that they can operate legally under that temporary use, and, you know, pending a council decision of whether we make that a permitted use? If we permit that use for all of that commercial district, then that cost of the administration is just something that would be a normal function of an administration and council to make those decisions, or is that too onerous on administration to be able to do that in multiple districts, if you will? If you want me to clarify.
Well, manager of planning and development, speak to what the legal options are for streamlining this kind of an issue.
So temporary use permits, which something we'll be discussing later on here, they provide for the ability to allow on a temporary basis a use which isn't currently permitted in that particular zoning district, but they are of a temporary nature. And I noticed in the zoning bylaw for the town of LaRange, different types of uses have different time frames. So you would have an operator that's planning on being open year round, coming back every 4 to 6 months, applying for a new temporary use permit, and the earliest that an applicant can come back to the table and apply for a temporary use permit is 1 week. So, let's say we issued a temporary use permit for 6 months. If it was permitted for a towing operation, for example, I'd have to check on that. Then that temporary use permit would run out, and it couldn't come back to apply again for a week after the expiry date. So technically, it would be illegal in the interim. And then they'd have to apply and go through the process where council approval would be required once again. So it's not really an ideal solution. Really, it comes down to either you include it as a permitted use in the zoning category where it's appropriate use to be undertaken, or you do the same thing and do it as an discretionary use that would give council controls, each time one of these operations comes about, where it could be located.
Because this to avoid a situation that we're currently challenged with, one of the questions, like there's obviously the researching of land from, I guess, buyer and seller to make sure that your intended use for that land fits within the current permitted uses before that transaction occurs. If this was municipal land bought from the municipality, we would discuss that with the buyer or with the seller. Sorry, with the buyer, to make sure that their intention could be used in that land if it was through the town, right? But because it's in this particular case, it's between private, then we could have an issue of.
I think, are you asking, is there a way that we can blanket write in things that we just can give a nod to in our zoning?
No, I'm saying like, because for example, if it's a
use we haven't considered in our bylaw, if it's not explicitly permitted or discretionary in our bylaw, it is
but
by
fits a common sense approach.
by that exact, unless within the definitions, the way we define the use, if we were to say auto related as a use, then we can contemplate within our definition a tow yard, taxi stand, all these kinds of things that might be auto related. Whereas if we have explicitly single family dwelling, duplex, but we don't have fourplex, and it's not included in the definition, and it's not included as a permitted or discretionary use within the zone, it is prohibited.
Okay, so Councilor Bashar, sorry, but Councilor Vetri had his hand up prior, so Councilor Vetri, sorry about that.
So a question, so when a person buys a chunk of property out in an industrial ground, for example, because it can get confusing out there with all that's going on, how does a person, and you kind of talked about it, right? You're like, so would the seller of the property have been responsible for telling the person who bought the property? So who's responsible for telling the person who's looking at acquiring the property what they can use it for?
The buyer.
The buyer.
No, yeah.
Research what's available and what's permitted and.
Okay, no, I'm trying to,
It's really, it's really up to the buyer to do their due diligence and come to the town hall and staff as to what uses are permitted on the property and what they could develop, what the setbacks are, the lot coverages, all these kinds of things. And we strongly encourage people to approach staff to seek the answers to those questions so they know. You've heard the phrase, it's always easier to ask for forgiveness.
before they purchase, right?
Right?
Yeah.
So they go ahead, or if I had a nickel for every time I heard that my realtor said, people put emphasis on what they're told by these professionals, but they aren't, they need to come to the horse's mouth, the town hall, and speak to staff and get that information. And you can do that through education and other tools, through the newsletter, through the website, and just encouraging people. When you have receptive staff that are here to help, that are willing to bend over backwards to make sure they get the answers they need to make good business decisions about what they're buying, then that'll grow pretty quickly.
Yeah.
All
No,
right.
thanks. That clears it up because I was just kind of confused about the process on that. So.
All right, thank you for that question, and thank you for that response, Councilor Herdesky.
Yeah, I think it might already be your intention, but I think just maybe looking at the zoning bylaw and just sort of thinking outside the box and say what possible things might come down the line, and then present that back to council as permissible uses, and that's already done, and then we're not,
Okay.
dealing with this.
Final question, and then we will call the question.
I agree with Joe. I'd like to look at bylaws and kind of, see if there's anything we can do to streamline things, but still protect ourselves at the same time.
Okay.
Just quickly, just in the strategic plan that was presented through the CAO there, I have included under planning a review of the zoning bylaw to identify exactly that.
Okay.
Where can we really get some good efficiency out of making adjustments to our processes in the short term, and hopefully by having council's buy-in to make those adjustments.
Okay.
Thanks a lot.
Councillor McPhail?
Sorry, but so the issue that we would run into from a zoning bylaw is if you make your permitted uses too broad, then you can't deny something that is a permitted use. If you make them too narrow, then you have the issue that we currently could be facing where we're like, yes, what we meant by automotive and recreation vehicle sales and rental could very well common sensely fit a towing yard if this is the specific example that we're using. Now, because we face that issue, do we just add one more thing and now pretty soon we're gonna have like 1,000 definitions of what it is? And that's where I'm saying, like, if it isn't, if the land use people that we've hired look at this and go, you know what, it definitely is common sense that it fits within this, we will give them a 90-day operator's permit that, provided there's no like major construction of like, you know, massive shops and all those going up in 90 days, you'll say for 90 days you can operate in the yard. And if council says no, then we'll take the temporary issue away. It will now be an illegally operating business. And if council says yes, because we think it's going to fall into what we would call common sense coming back into our zoning bylaw, then it's just, I think it just cuts a little bit of the red tape for something that might be close enough to our zoning bylaw that our bylaw officers and enforcement team would look at and say, yeah, this, you know what I mean? I think I'm going in a circle here.
No, I just speak to that a little bit. Like, so I guess in essence, by not closing the business, that's what we've done, right? By not enforcing,
Right.
we've essentially said we'll allow you to operate, but no, this has to get council approval. And when that does or does not happen, that consequence will be in place. So that's kind of passively what we've done. The other thing that you know, we hope to do with regards to some of this stuff is make it easier, but we also need to start educating the community more, because one of the challenges I'm seeing is people are coming after the fact, or hey, I'm opening my business in 2 days, or and expecting us just to be like available and able to do that whole process for them in that time frame.
Mm-hmm.
And so one, we want to be helpful, but we also need them to help us in that regard too, right? So.
Just lastly, if I may, you know, on the temporary idea, the problem there is that someone that actually wants to purchase the land and invest in that land, it's very difficult for them to do so if you're doing things on a temporary basis. If they're looking at investing money in the community and then maybe building some facilities, whether they be very small in comparison to, the towing business doesn't require much in terms of building, but whether they're going to put the money on the table because, you know, for something that's so short term, that's another matter entirely.
Okay.
Right.
Thank you, Councilor Sharp. Final question, and then we are calling the question.
No, it just comment that this is the thing I've been bringing to this table for 2 years about we need to look at our zoning bylaw and OCP, make sure that our policies are up to date, are serving our people, and the red tape is removed where we found it, because they're living documents. They're meant to be changed, so when we get a use that we haven't contemplated in a zone that belongs, then that's why people have the ability to request a zoning change to add it. But this is a bigger issue on our policy leadership, as we need to sit down and actually schedule time to go through policy by policy, if that's the way it needs to be, to update our zoning, to make it easier that people can, it's front and center, easy to pick up, turn to a page and say, I can open a business if I do this, you know, and just have a little bit more
Structure.
yeah, just to be able to serve our residents better in that sense. And we have a decent bylaw to begin with, and it's just a matter of taking it over the finish line of that step of getting it there. So, and we've got an amazing administration that has been working towards that since Lyle came on board, I know that, and we've been, you know, plugging away where we can, but yeah, so that's just I'll get off my box and.
All right, so based on the motion initially presented, I'm going to call the question. So all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed, please say nay. Motion is carried. Moving on to item 6.2 regarding community services, fees, cancellations, and refunds policy based on the premise that those have remained unchanged for the past 4 years. Any questions?
Yes.
Councillor Clausen.
Allison, can you bring this up on the screen? When I open it, it's the towing request.
It should be there now.
Yeah, if you might have to
Refresh
refresh.
your
Just
site.
refresh, yeah, the policy itself or the decision?
Request for decision is, it came up as the towing. Okay, it's fixed now.
It's in fix now?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Any questions or discussion on that item? Yes?
Just, and like, I'll let Connor field the questions and whatnot. Essentially, one of the things we wanted to mention is just that, you know, the intent is to make sure that policy is being implemented by council as opposed to staff with fees in regards to those kinds of things. And I would normally bring this first draft through committee of the whole, and we would flush it out a little bit more, but we thought, just in the interest of time and the fact that it isn't in place, that we would expedite the process. But of course, if council has a lot of feedback, then we will workshop it, bring it back. That's not a problem at all.
Okay, thank you for that. Any questions, discussion from council? Councillor Betry?
I'd like to make the motion that council proceed with option A and approve the community service fees cancellation and refunds policy number 2000-1 as presented.
Okay, do we have a seconder for that motion? Okay. All right, that motion is carried.
You have to call a question.
Oh, sorry, call the question. All in favor say aye.
I'd like to ask
Oh,
questions
you have a
first.
question, sir.
Connor, can you highlight what has changed from the previous policy?
Not much. Well, there wasn't the previous policy
There was none at all.
that guided
Or
this.
from the previous numbers that were used?
One thing to highlight is that we're looking at 100% subsidy for schools, and historically schools were charged or not. And so the expectation between schools is typically that they're not going to be charged for use of ice or curling facility, and so we're hoping to enforce that with policy at this point.
Okay.
But the percentages that we presented in the policy are very similar and to what they've typically been charged, and the changes would be negligible.
So, if I may, would this mean, for example, graduation, would there be a cost for the school graduation or the school whatever, like any other schools?
I would classify as a facility booking, a facility rental and not a booking.
Okay.
And so there is a differentiation between those in the policy, and so they would still be charged in that case.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
For ice time, for example, though, charge would be 0.
Yeah, the intent would be for it to cover school use during school hours for school curriculum. The idea being that those are what the downtimes for our facility anyway.
Right. During the school
So,
days,
you know, of course, if we had, for example, gymnasium and they wanted to run a volleyball tournament in the gym on the weekend, that would be during prime time and that have costs associated with it and other things. And so we wouldn't look at that, but if they were interested in like grad, we would point them down to either the community granting policy or a special request of council to waive fees or
Mhm.
some other mechanism to look at that issue.
So what about nonprofit organizations that were doing, I don't know, fundraiser or hosting an event, or does the policy cover that, or would that just be seen as a facility rental?
And that would typically be seen as the adult rate for a facility.
Okay.
So, and then just to touch on that, and council could change this, but currently the policy doesn't differentiate a commercial rate versus a nonprofit rate. If you wanted to add that into the policy as a statement, for example, that commercial rate was 125% the adult rate or something like that, as a surcharge for a commercial event activity, you could add that. Alternatively, you'd be looking at, as Connor said, either the adult rate if it was an adult organization, or if it was a minor sport organization, the youth rate.
So what if it's like us? So what if we're like fundraising for equipment at the new long-term facility? We wouldn't be charging ourselves, I imagine. There's something in the policy that exempts town business usage, I imagine, or?
It just isn't contemplated because we would
Okay.
just use it. If it was, whether it was the curling rink for a Christmas party or a fundraiser in the arena, if it was us putting on the event, we wouldn't put up an invoice to ourselves.
Okay, yeah.
I do want to add one thing about the school subsidy that I mentioned earlier, is that during school hours, typically our facilities are quiet. And so usually the curling rink or skating rink, if we put in drop-in programs, the participation is low. And so we're hoping to increase that participation and get the community more active by that subsidy.
Cool, perfect.
Thanks, Connor.
All right, thank you. Any other questions from the floor? No? Okay, so the motion is on the table. Calling the question, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed, please say nay. Okay, motion is carried. Looking at item 6.3, there's a temporary use permit, which was an addition to the agenda. If administration could provide additional information on that.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. So the temporary shelter at 719 Orange Avenue is getting ready to open up here on October 1st, Saturday, to provide overnight accommodation during the winter months. The shelter has obtained a temporary use permit annually since 2016, had to operate its facility for overnight accommodation, and recently undertook renovations to bring the facility up to building code. In review of the zoning bylaw, staff confirmed that an emergency or homeless shelter is not, or directly related use to those shelters is not permitted in the applicable C3 shoreline commercial district, except as authorized by approval of a temporary use permit by council. As such, a longer-term solution to operate a shelter at this location may be needed, and staff is working with the applicant to discuss future plans and options in this regard. So, in the interim, staff is recommending approval of a temporary use permit as follows. That council approves temporary use permit 2022-TUP-01 to allow an emergency shelter to operate on the property addressed as 719 Orange Avenue and described as Lot 1, Block 18, Plan number CR 3862 for an 8-month period starting on October 1st, 2022 and ending on May 30th, 2023.
I'll move to allow the temporary use permit.
I'll second.
Okay. Any questions, discussion?
Just to let you know, Lyle, there is a homeless strategy committee that is ramping up and getting everything on board for that.
Okay. Councilor Sharp? No? Okay. All right, so calling the question, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed, please say nay. That motion is carried. So I am looking for a motion for us to move into camera.
So move.
All right. Oh,